Well, hello everyone. It's great to be with you today. I feel like we are helping you get ready for an adventure of a trip into the future. So we're going to help pack your bags and know how to appropriately prepare and have a good trip as we both go together. We want you to be armed with a reserve study that you can use effectively, and that's like learning how to use a map. So you've got the plan, and we now want to make sure you know how to use it. As we go through today's webinar, because you're muted to keep background noise to a minimum, if any of us ever need your feedback, Jim or I will ask for hands raised. And you can do that by clicking the hands raised icon on your control panel. It looks like the one I'm showing on screen. So let's give that a practice. Grab your mouse and click the hands raised icon in your control panel. So I'll know that you're ready for us to get going on today's presentation. We are going to keep you, hopefully, taking notes and grabbing your mouse. Okay, got it. Thank you very much. I'm seeing hands go up all up and down my list. I'm going to now click hands down. Okay, and we are ready to start the program. Okay, well, we've broken today's program into this outline that you see on screen. I'll start out by making sure you know what this thing is that we call a reserve study, so you can begin to understand how it fits in and how it works into the association's future. As you can see, we're going to address then who it goes to, applying it to your association, and we'll end with what success looks like before we draw this program to a close. And many of you perhaps are thinking, gee, I'm not sure kind of what this is. Or if we talk about going on an adventure, a trip into the future, you're not sure what the landmarks are, the key landmarks along the way. So we're going to make it pretty simple here. No mysteries. We're going to show what to look for and then what to do when you have those pieces of information. So we're going to take you right through. And it starts by knowing what kind of reserve study you got to start with. There are three types. A full reserve study, update with site visit, and an update no site visit. They work together because the full reserve study is generally only done once. Once we know how much roofing, how much asphalt, how much carpet you have, you don't need to ever hire us to remeasure that asset. So after you do the full reserve study, most associations then alternate between their with site visit update and the no site visit update, doing the with site visit every few years and the no site visit in those in between years. And again, keeping the numbers pretty simple. I'm looking at one hand here and not even getting up to 5. There's 3 types of results to look for in your reserve study: the component list, reserve fund strength, and the funding plan. For those of you who've heard our webinars before, these should be familiar, but they bear repeating. Now, the component list is what we call the foundation of every reserve study. But if you look at it a different way, when we talk about using the reserve study, a component list is a disclosure, and the reserve fund strength is a disclosure. It's a status. Where are we now? What's happening now? What condition are things now? And the funding plan is a little bit different in that it is a recommendation. So you can see how these 3 parts fit together, going from the top to the bottom. Recommendation is, okay, what's our plan of action? And then that's based on what's our starting point? Do we have enough cash? Are we behind to start with? Or are we at a good position financially to start with? And the disclosures, of course, what projects are we dealing with? How big is the mountain range that we're trying to climb here? And another thing about what you have with a reserve study is you have, in about 25 states now, compliance with the law. And that's a good thing. That's not the primary reason you prepare a reserve study. Primary reason is to get that set of three information that I just showed on the prior screen, because that's what you need to guide the association into the future. But you do get compliance with the law. And that's either something that will help you during your budget time of year, something that you need to do for prospective buyers, a buyer type disclosure, or it may be disclosures that you're responsible to provide to your individual owners. And also with a reserve study, one thing you get is something that is perishable. We've heard it said that it has a shelf life. And so whether you think of it perishable or shelf life, yes, a reserve study goes out of date. We see how much time and effort goes into a reserve study. We know how delicate those assumptions are, how they go out of date after a year. And so we talk about a reserve study having a 1-year shelf life. It's good for 1 year. It expires at the end of that year, and it's time to refresh that information. Just like the things you see on screen. At one point in time, those were all great things. Although now that I look at it, I'm not sure that Orange leadership was that great of a thing, but it had its time, and we moved on, and there's better things out there now. So understand that a reserve study quickly loses its usefulness, and you need to understand that it's by nature something that needs to be updated. So let me turn now over to Jim, and he'll take it from here.
Hey, thanks, Robert, and good afternoon to most of you, everybody. And it's my pleasure to be with you today. That slide brings back a lot of memories. My first cell phone was the size of a toaster. It came in a bag, and I was so proud of it.
I had one of those big ones also.
Yeah, they were the powerful ones, remember?
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah. So I'm going to take you towards, you've got a reserve study now. What do you do with it, and who does it go to? I want to remind a few slides ago that you should view this as a planning and communication and disclosure document. Can help you in many ways. And as the slide implies, remember that you're a village. You're in this with your fellow owners, fellow board members, and I think your real estate community, and with your legislators as well, if you look at a wider picture. And depending upon the decisions that you make, you can have an angry mob or a happy village. So you should use the study both to aid your internal planning, and externally, you can use it to educate and help move you towards the inevitable projects that are facing the Association for Maintenance, Repair, and Replacement. So who does it go to? Let's first just understand that most reserve studies can be as many as 150, 200 pages, and we can break it down into the small and easily digestible in the executive summary. And I think in most formats that you're going to find, you're going to see those key 3 results that Robert mentioned a little bit ago. Or then you have the large format that can get into photographic inventory pages discussing methodology and funding principles and provide a lot more information and education. Let's go to the next one. But you, as board members, managers, a part of the community's team, you're in the best position to assess the needs and the dynamics of the community and to what you distribute and how you distribute it. Perhaps you've got a website, perhaps the community has a newsletter, or you can simply print something like the executive summary, and being such a small document, and again, it contains the key information. And we'll speak to more of this later, but some states have specific requirements. In the state that I primarily operate in, Washington, the reserve study in its entirety is required with the public offering statement for new potential buyers, resale certificates, units being resold, and then certain data that comes from the reserve study is supposed to be included with the annual budget mailing to owners as they consider the upcoming budget. And just like your reserve study is a custom fit, should be a custom fit, it's your decision how to customize your distribution and what you communicate to your owners. And I recommend highly that every board has a primary contact that works closely with that reserve study provider in a collaborative process, not just ensuring that the information that's provided to this study provider is accurate, the financials and information like that, but that they understand it and they can communicate to fellow board members and ask and answer reasonable questions from the membership. And so I think at this point, I think we're going to turn it back to you, Robert, to talk about how you can apply it.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, what I think about, I guess maybe you could say what I dread, is the associations that see the reserve study just as that compliance type thing. Maybe they were encouraged or cajoled into getting the reserve study by their manager, by their accountant, by their attorney. And now that they got the reserve study done, they can get all these people off their back and get on to what they consider normal business. And that's not what we want to see here. We want to see associations using that reserve study and not seeing that it is just a task that can be discarded. So let me take you back to what I spoke about just a moment ago, seeing the three purposes of the reserve study. That'll give us a framework for understanding how it has use for the association. Remember that the funding plan is what do we do now? What action do we take? The reserve fund strength is that understanding of do we have enough? And the component list is what projects are scheduled. Are they soon? Are they far? Are they small? Are they big? And they're measured or called by different things. The funding plan is literally that. You call it the contribution rate. It may be called the multi-year funding plan. The reserve fund strength is classically measured in percent funded, so you know what it's a size or a fit type of number. It means so much more than just saying, well, we have $200,000. $200,000 can mean very different things depending on if you're a small association with very little assets or a large association with a $500,000 roof project next year. You can see how just talking about your cash doesn't really tell you much. In the component list, that's just something important for you to understand what your obligations are, where they fit, which are the large projects, which are the small projects. And as Jim was indicating, you get that information in the executive summary, or it should appear in just about every reserve study provider's executive summary out there. You get the component list, classically a list of useful life, remaining useful life, replacement cost, description of the component, measure of fund size, and the recommended contribution. So that's an easy thing, as Jim indicated, to be able to push out and provide to the owners so they know what's going on. And that detailed information, look at it, study it, understand, oh, great, we're getting new pool furniture this year. What's next? Building. I would have thought that could have lasted a couple years longer. Well, when we show something with a short remaining useful life, it's because we thought it doesn't have much time left. Maybe we were seeing the advanced signs of deterioration that you weren't seeing because we have a little more of a trained eye on that type of thing. And the reserve fund strength is important. It makes a big difference in your exposure to special assessments. If your reserve fund strength is above 70%, you can see that your special assessment risk is very, very low. The opposite is true. If your percent funded is down to 0 to 30%, you have a very significant special assessment risk. And so it's true. The more money you have in reserves, the lower your special assessment risk is. And so it's the strategic choices that you get to make as a board, and you learn that in your reserve study. And the funding plan. Don't just focus on that initial year's recommendation. See how it fits into the multi-year plan. This is a nice, pretty normal one where it flows upward each year very nominally with inflation. Or if you want to, you can see it. Again, most providers have this type of a sheet where it shows the 30-year summary, starting from the cash that you start with, a comparison to fully funded balance, yielding your percent funded. If you need a special assessment, the contributions you're going to make, interest, expenses. Basically, it summarizes it. Don't try to read this all on screen. Something like this should be in your reserve study, but it's a nice one-page summary guide. We are here, and we're going to this other place, and along the way, we're going to have a lot of projects, some big expense years, some small expense years, and you kind of begin to see the journey, the multi-year journey that you're going on, that you as a board member or manager have a seat at the table in for one or more years. And another thing I want to point out is the pages that now are pretty typical in all with site visit and full reserve studies out there in the country, prepared by different providers. They will have a photographic inventory. So go through this. There's a lot of information. The picture speaks 1,000 words. You may not see how the asphalt is all deteriorated right in front of the dumpsters. Jim, I think you would probably agree with me. There's so many boards that, no offense, but they don't know that they have 3 tot lots because they only see 2 as they go from their car to the mailbox to their home, things like that. So it is helpful for you to see what the magnitude of the common areas are, and hopefully that's nicely documented in the reserve state. So flip through it, gather what you can, read it through, and understand what your obligations are as a board member or manager at the association.
Yeah, exactly right, Robert. And I think seeing those photos really helps, because a lot of people would look at a community and say, where do we start? Where do we start with the planning? You know, some communities are very large, and really helps you kind of put your arms and narrow your focus, which is a great segue. We've talked a bit now about who and what to distribute. Now let's talk about what you do. A few slides ago, Robert put a 30-year summary table up there that showed where you start, your starting reserve balance, and these projected expenses. And most studies are in the 20 to 30-year outlook and forecast range. And so how do you get to start focusing on items when you have this huge list? Well, you narrow your focus and start with the next 5 years in particular. And your goal, the way to approach this is with a mindset of how can we deliver the best value for the dollars, the reserve dollars that we'll be spending on these projects that are identified and that are very predictable. So with that in mind, your goal then is to start formulating a plan of action. How can we approach this project from the standpoint of what scope are we looking at, what specifications, who are our experts that we go to, and how many estimates should we be getting? And you start working on that part of the problem. So focus on those first 5 years. Realize that this study is a living document, that each year the factors that affect it, the physical condition of those components of your property, the economic factors that go into the plan, they're all changing. And so it's why you're continually, we had that poll to start. If you're pulling it out only when there's questions, I would urge you to look at it a little more frequently. And they've also become a historical document. We regularly have notes in our reports that talk about the who's and the why's and what year things were done. And so it's a great educational tool as well for new board members and new owners and the like. And if you can, as you communicate this and you start digesting what the study is doing for you, think in terms of these contributions are not for a rainy day or some far off distant land. It's offsetting the cost of current deterioration that's happening every day around you. And think of, instead of homeowners fees as dues, they're assessments. They're as real as any bill of the association. It's important that you work closely with your reserve study provider in a collaborative process before and after the study. As questions come up, not just at the board level, but from the community. I know, speaking for myself, and I'm sure Robert feels the same way, we're perfectly happy to steer you in the direction of more information and of additional tools as those questions come up and you ponder what to do and to what level and when and what kind of options you might have.
Jim, totally agree. We don't want boards pondering and getting worried about something when they could just reach out with a phone call or email and say, what do you think about this? Or what did you mean by this? It's sometimes the most valuable 5 or 15 minutes we can spend with a client.
Yeah, very good. And alert your vendors. You've got most associations as part of their team. They've got a key roofer, a painter, maybe you're in a mid or high rise, and your elevator consultant or technician. Their input is valuable. It's a world of specialists, and all of that, the more information that the reserve study provider can get, the better that the document and the plan going forward can be. And we want you to realize as you're doing your budgets, first of all, you should look at the reserve study as a budget process in and of itself. It works alongside your operating budget, and know that it's not atypical. You see it right there on your slide. The average reserve contribution of total assessments is about 25%, sometimes as much as 40%. So it's significant, and it should be treated with the same diligence and care and preparation as your overall operating budget. You can look for information as you communicate this, again, as it's to underlie that concept that it's as real as any bill of the association that you're budgeting for. Look for data that gives you the deterioration rate within your community. And you can see those items on screen as you, if you have all of those at your community, most of you would reasonably realize that they are, life is being used up each year, and it's deteriorating in plain sight. Now, a common mistake that is often made, has been made throughout the 23 years I've been doing this, is waiting in the budget process until the bottom. It's usually a negative indication that I see when I review a budget, and the last line item on the budget is contribution towards reserves. Kind of implies that that's what's left over in the pot. And then I hear some communities talk about, we can't raise our reserve contributions for these distant expenses because the owners will be unhappy about that. But if you use the right language and approach, and the study underpins that reserve contribution line item, then I think you've got a much greater chance of success. And again, kind of as we talked about early, that goes to your communication style for your community. But at minimum, I think that executive summary should be distributed and help people to understand what reserves are for. Okay, and once you've got that study, that you have worked together collaboratively with your reserve study provider on becoming a sound platform, work to understand it, execute it, and then use that also to create, to consider for the policies that you create around reserves, policies about how you might invest reserve funds, how you handle reserve expenses in terms of board resolutions. It's how it's recorded in the minutes, and things like that. And your safeguards, very important as well, is that sometimes these reserve funds become very large, and it's important to have safeguards in place.
Hey, Jim, let me break in here and ask our audience here, how many of you, give me a show of hands, have an official reserve either policy or reserve investment policy? Give me a show of hands if you have a reserve investment policy or any kind of official document along the side. Got it. Jim, I'm not sure you can see the hands that I can see, but it's 10% or so. So, boy, that's a great thing to have at your association, a great opportunity to help in the utility. Wouldn't you agree?
I agree. Yeah, it's been an unfortunate rising stories that you hear of funds being mismanaged or sometimes even embezzled. Reserve funds are where, again, they can accumulate, and you have to have safeguards and policies in place. So I think we've had samples in the past, and certainly you can reach out to us after this webinar. We'd be happy to give you some guidance that way. All right, let's move forward a little bit. The reserve study, so again, it's a tool for your guidance in the budget process, in the management of these large expenses, but do you have to follow it? And the answer is no, you do not. But I would caution that you really take the time to understand the risks if you don't. And some of those risks, if you're putting off projects or taking shortcuts, can wind up being very costly, not only in terms of the measurable. We're going to talk about it in a little bit about how it affects property values, but also community spirit. And that's one that's hard to measure. But generally, you wanting to run this business of the association diligently. And so if you had a tool, what if you had a tool that would help you test different scenarios? Sometimes our clients don't follow exactly to the letter our recommendations. And so we've worked on and developed a tool that Robert's going to tell you about that you can use. And maybe there's others out there similarly to test different choices you might make.
Right. Hey, Jim, let me show our audience. We've got this new tool called UPlanet. It's designed to eliminate guessing. As you're working with the reserve study, we don't want you wondering about things. You heard us talking about if you're concerned, if you have a question, reach out to us. We also have now given you this tool that I'm going to show it on screen here. How's that? Did that come up okay?
Looks good.
Good. Okay. When you get a reserve study from Association Reserves, we deliver it to you via your web portal or client center. And if you're an association manager or portfolio manager, when you log in, you'll see all your list of properties here. And so let's click on one of them. And you can see you've got your reserve study, but now we have another tab here called UPlanet. And this is literally your reserve study now online on screen. You can consider it your online reserve calculator. So you can test things out. You can look at your components. You can change the timing or the cost of a component. With your control panel here, you can change the amount of starting balance that you have. You can see this is a significant association. They have $900-some thousand. You can change interest and inflation. You can adjust your assumptions about what we can do, how much to contribute. Let me just show you how this works. This is you can see a fully funded analysis where with $24,400 per month, they are going to eventually be fully funded. If they want to find out how much they need to contribute just to stay cash positive, you click this baseline solver wizard, and you can see that they now stay cash positive, but they're lumbering down there in the 0 to 30 or 40% range, which you all know now. I mean, there's the fair chance of a special assessment in these years. But you can see your reserve contribution dropped from $24,400 down to $17,600. So your real range of reserve contributions is above $17,600 all the way up to $24,400. And you say, well, hey, and Jim suggested this earlier. Let me get something stable here. Let's get back to fully funded.
Yeah. What if our clients, I remember, Robert, do you remember when they were getting our clients routinely got 5 to 6% rate of return on their reserves?
We're dating ourselves. Okay, let's just do that for demonstration's sake. So let's save 5% and see what a difference that makes in the necessary recommendations. Wow. Now they way overshoot. So with the full solver, instead of 24,400, they're down to now 20,000 because Mr. Bank is providing $4,000 a month that otherwise was needed. Or you can go to the components. Let's see what stands out here. I think this place had siding. Yeah, let's say they got a written guarantee from the manufacturer that it will last forever. And this is our webinar. We can create a fantasy. So let's edit this component and turn the funding off for this. You can see how it went gray. So their fiber cement siding has gone away. And now we can change whatever we want. We'll leave that control panel the way it was. And again, without that fiber cement siding, they way overshoot, and the full funding contribution rate could be down to 17,000. So this is how you can start to begin to test things. You can do a custom series of ideas here on the override, and you can print out tables and charts to bring to the board meeting. So you and your board, as we showed a few slides ago, can sit around and talk and discuss what is the right number for us. How can we do these things? What's it mean if we change our reserve fund to a different bank with a different interest rate? All those kinds of things. But that's just the demo that I wanted to show. And let's get back to the actual program here. Give me just a moment to get reset. Okay, so that's an idea of what we're encouraging you to do with UPlanet. get your hands on the wheel with your association and guide your association. Okay, more things you can and should do. There's a number of states that have some specific disclosures as far as what they need to do for budgets. In the state of California and Washington, they need to have some very specific forms that are filled out. So that's something that you get with a reserve study. And this is also something that you can leverage to your advantage. Make sure the owners are on that same communication page with you. Let them know that there is a plan and how their reserve funds are being used. It's kind of like the signs you see along the freeway, how your tax funds are being used. Get them on the same page. And that may mean that in addition to doing the numbers, you may need to sell the plan. And as Jim said, it's not for the future. The reserve contributions, it's almost like a usage fee. The building is deteriorating. In the cartoon here, you see this guy looking like he's trying to clean his glasses because you can't imagine how this guy is happy with the building falling apart like this. The building costs money as it deteriorates, and you need to offset that with reserve contributions. So we have some clients that are actually renaming reserve contributions to cost of deterioration, which is novel. And as you are pitching your budget to the owners, we have a lot of board members here today. As you're figuring out, well, what are we actually going to say, you may need to understand that it's not just what are we going to say to encourage people to make the or agree to the concept of funding more towards reserves, but you may need to paint the picture of, well, if we don't, this bad thing is going to happen. So understand that there's two ways to look at it. And one way to make sure that, or one way to encourage your homeowners that this is a good plan, is reminding them of a study that we did back in 2018 of about 100 associations in a very tight area of Los Angeles, where same socioeconomic, same physical situation, we had enough associations to be able to see what home prices were selling for. And even when we neutralized it by square footage, we were able to find that homes in associations that were well funded sold for a little over 12% more than homes in associations that were poorly funded. So what we come out learning from that is that the extra $20 or $30 a month that you put into reserves to help make sure you have enough money to paint the place and have a good roof and to keep the entry gate operating well so it's not stuck open, the lobby looks good, all that kind of stuff is going to come back as an incredible return on investment. And that's just a great way to help sell a reserve plan.
Wow, that's profound. In our area, Robert, the average condo is about $500,000, and so we're talking about a $60,000 increase in sales price for an association that runs it well. Small price to pay for a little bit of extra administrative time and a few extra reserve contributions.
Yeah, it realistically helps that curb appeal and makes the place look great, and it's rewarded with higher home values.
Very good. Well, listen, as we begin to wrap up our time today, let's stop and recap and envision what success looks like. I have often talked about owners and those who work and serve community associations can agree on two things: that we strive for peace of mind, that the business of the association is running well, and that takes a village, it takes a team, and that we make decisions that maximize the return on the real estate investment. I think everybody can agree on those things. Next slide, Robert. There we go. And so, to put some bullet points on that, on what success looks like, we want to have no deferred maintenance. We want to make timely decisions, proactively plan for the best value in executing the painting, the roofing, the asphalt, the siding, the windows, and the decks. Keep the property in top marketable appearance and condition on any given day, because one owner may want to sell this year, one next year, one not for 10 years, and everybody deserves to have that opportunity for the maximum return. And success looks like an operating budget that's balanced, that includes adequate reserve contributions, and that you're protecting the reserve fund in the ways that you operate it, and your policies and the choices that you make to spend those reserve funds. Your community is successful if you're not having special assessments. There's great cost, not only measurable in the extra admin time, and association loans are very expensive, but in those things that you can't measure, like just the spirit of the community that I mentioned earlier. And successful associations are informed, and they're aware of what they collectively are charged to enhance, maintain, and protect. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Robert, to conclude today before our question and answer time.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I've heard some speakers describe that as peaceful and productive communities, and that comes when you do have the money to do what needs to be done, and it's a community that is moving forward and not like a ship out battered by the waves. Well, let me take just a couple of minutes here and bring us to conclusion. And that means reminding you that using a reserve study, not just setting it aside, it leads to no special assessments, minimized expenses, because you've eliminated all those extra projects that come when there's delays, extra expenses that come with delays, maximizes property values, and it minimizes board liability. So those are all great things that you can enjoy. And we here at Association Reserves are here to guide you down that path, help you in this journey to the future, even in crazy years like 2020, and maybe I should say, especially in crazy years like 2020, helping you understand where the main trail is, what the forks are, where the dangers lie, and how to get your association successfully towards that improved future. Some tips, some guidelines, and some recommendations. Don't do that. That's not in your best interest. Basically, we're here to help. I hope you got that message that some time spent with your reserve study provider is time well spent. We are here to help get you into a successful future. It is your community, but there's a lot more that can be done with your reserve study once it is delivered. And it's our job, it's our pleasure at Association Reserves to provide quality, dependable guidance. That's our reputation. That's what we've been doing for over 33 years now to clients in all 50 states. So on behalf of Jim and myself, it's been our pleasure to share some of our experience and our expertise to help you with the decisions that you make. And we want to encourage you to have courage and to know what the right things to do are. And we're here with you. So at this point in time, let me turn the microphone over to Paige for her Q&A time. Paige.
Thank you, Robert and Jim.